It's time to rock and roll. Sure, that's how this video can start. Speaking of rock and roll, you know what fantasy book brings brazen fun and a rock and roll sensibility to the fantasy genre? Why, it's Kings of the Wyld. Credit to Sebastian de Castell for that quote that's on the back of the book. Now, I did a review of this book earlier this year when I read it. I'll link that review up there, but the upshot is I really liked it. And I've done a couple videos on this channel called Pitching a Pilot, where I pitch my ideal version of a pilot episode for a TV show of a fantasy book. And I think Kings of the Wyld absolutely deserves to be part of that. So this is going to be my pitching a pilot for Kings of the Wyld. What if this book got turned into a TV show and I was, for some reason, handed the reins of the pilot episode? If you haven't seen the other ones of these, basically what I do is I say what my ideal version of the opening scene and the closing scene are, and then if there's anything in between that I want to play around with, I'll also cover that. But I'm mainly covering the opening scene and the closing scene, the bookends of the episode. So, spoilers for the first 200 episodes, let's say, of episodes. Spoilers for the first 200 pages of Kings of the Wyld, let's say. I'm pretty excited about this one. I wanted to do another pitching a pilot, and I've got a good idea for this. So without further ado, let me pitch to you my ideal pilot episode for a Kings of the Wyld TV show. For the opening scene, I think it would be cool if we started with a flashback to Saga in their glory days. See the whole gang together, working as a team in a big, epic fight against some fantasy monster. Maybe it's the fight with the Treant where Clay gets Blackheart. That would give us a good excuse to, focus in on Clay during that flashback and see that, oh yeah, he's gonna be our main character. So we see the team all fighting together, we see generally what they do. Ganelon's the big tough guy, Matrix got his knives, Moog is casting spells. We get a general hint of what each character's personality is through this flashback. But this isn't just a straightforward flashback action sequence, no. I think it would be really fun if this was intercut with Clay's life in the modern day. So in the past, he's fighting, he's with the team, he's doing his whole thing, but then in the modern day, he's just sitting at home, got his wife, got his kid, living a fairly menial, mundane life. It's boring, but he's content with it. Whereas in the past, it's hectic and action heavy and frantic and it's terrifying. Intercut that fight with just general everyday chores, like, maybe you have a bit where he goes to chop at a Treant and then it cuts to him chopping up a carrot for some soup or something like that. Really juxtapose the life that Clay used to live with the life that he's living now, and especially focus in on the terror that can emerge in a fight in a flashback and the contented state that Clay is in now. Maybe have a bit where the fight is over, but he's got this look on his face that's like, oh, that was a lot. And then back to the modern day here, he's just sitting with his family and his dog, and he's got a smile on his face. I think that would be a really cool introduction to Clay as a character. Lets first off, introduces you to Saga as a whole group, gives whoever the main actors will be a chance to shine right up top, gives us a chance to see Saga back in their glory days, gives us a chance to see a cool fantasy fight with a fantasy monster. We always like that. That's always a fun thing to see. And it shows us quite clearly the sort of personality that Clay has. He's a slow and steady thinking man. Where he is now, he's older, but he's got a wife, he's got a daughter who he loves, he's got a loyal dog, he's got a lovely family home, and he is pretty content with it and he's happy. And that's the opening scene, and then we maybe have the credit roll and then follow Clay in his modern life doing his guard watchtower thing. Maybe in the flashback you could do something about Clay not liking wearing helmets and bring that into the fold somehow, have a little funny moment. And then we just see Clay's day-to-day life, living in this small town, living with his family, couple of friends, establishing the status quo for Clay nowadays before Gabriel comes along and kicks off the overall plot. I think that would be a cool way to open a Kings of the Wyld show. And then from there, I'd say it's pretty much we just follow what happens in the book. Maybe have a couple more flashbacks to Saga's glory days, maybe not. I don't think it's necessary to have more than that one at the beginning just to establish this is what they used to do, this is what at least one of them is doing now. And just follow Clay eventually deciding to go with Gabriel and try and save his daughter and get the band back together. Off they go, they're about to start the show. One thing I do think would be cool is, because of the general tone of Kings of the Wyld, I think there's a real opportunity to have a lot of fun with this and do something unique and fresh. And because a lot of the world building in regards to the way mercenary bands operate, it is clearly inspired by the golden age of rock bands. I think it would be fun to actually have classic rock music play in the soundtrack for the show. That'd be something that sets it apart from other fantasy shows like The Witcher, and maybe it could be like a fantasy version of a classic rock song, like that Bardcore channel on YouTube, but if you've seen that, do a sort of medieval fantasy style version of a modern song, or not a modern song, but a classic rock song, you know what I mean. I think that's an option, but I do think it would be fun and also refreshing to see just full-on rock music in a fantasy show, because it is jarring and anachronistic, but it would make it unique and fun. You know, who doesn't want to see some mercenaries go up against a beast while Ballroom Blitz plays in the background, you know? Just continue the rock and roll sensibility that this quote is talking about. Also, piggybacking off that train of thought, I also think it would be fun to have the episode titles be named after classic rock songs. And I think episode 1 has to be The Boys Are Back in Town. That's the tagline for the book, makes sense, and I figure episode 1 should be getting the band back together. Getting all of these boys, getting them back in town. And so with that in mind, let me tell you about the closing scene. Where am I deciding to end the first episode of this show? I think it's best if the majority of the band are already back together by the end of episode 1. Episode 1 is basically just going to everyone going like, hey, we're getting the band back together. Wanna join the band again? Yes, you do. And then being like, you son of a bitch, I'm in. So we get introduced to Clay and Gabe and Moog and Matrick. And I think the closing scene, once again, spoilers for, let's say, the first 200 pages of Kings of the Wyld, the closing scene should be Matrick's funeral. Matrick tries to fake his death so he can get away from his controlling wife and go with the boys, and then they end up doing a pyre funeral, sending him down the river. And just the chaos of that episode, when Clay having to step up and being like, oh no, let me shoot the bow, he was my friend, and then missing on purpose, and then finding out that, oh yeah, it goes over a waterfall, this river, so yeah, even though you've not set him on fire, he's still gonna go over the falls. And just, that was one of my favourite scenes from the book, just the absolute farcical nature of it all. It gives us a chance to see the strong emotional beats of the story as well as the very funny beats of the story, which work in tandem together, ending on this very funny sequence where everything's just going wrong and they're trying desperately to scrape their plan back together and it's just not working, and then just ending on the knowledge that Matrick's about to go over a cliff. I think that would make a great, fun, funny cliffhanger-esque ending for the first episode. Establishes the tone of the overall story well. We've had enough time to spend with each character and generally get to know what their vibe is. Also, if we get to that point, then it gives us a chance to meet Lastleaf and he can do his whole villain monologue and we can establish him as the main antagonist of the series, which is something that feels like that should be in the first episode if it's turned into a show. So that is the first episode. The boys are back in town. We end with Matrick going over the waterfall in his fake funeral pyre. And now I've got a few sort of last little threads of thought that about the general series outside of the pilot episode. As I mentioned, I think it would be fun if each episode was named after a classic rock song. And of course, if I cut it off there, then the band is back together except for one member, Ganelon. We have yet to meet him. And if the second episode deals with the Ganelon situation, where it turns out he's been, turned to stone by a Gorgon and they've got to make a deal with her to free him. The second episode deals with that, then I think a good title for that is Between a Rock and a Hard Place. Between a Rock and a Hard Place by the Rolling Stones, that's your episode 2 title. If episode 3 deals with them having to do the fight at the Maxathon and them accidentally burning down the inn the night before, then I mentioned it earlier, why not Ballroom Blitz for episode 3? I feel like the general tone of the book itself and the story and the characters lend itself well to leaning more into that aspect of it. And as I said before, I think it would be very fun to hear like actual rock and roll songs play in the soundtrack to this. It's something that no fantasy show has actually really done before. Game of Thrones, The Witcher, Merlin, they all have orchestral compositions to them, and they're all good soundtracks, the ones that I've mentioned. But wouldn't it be fun to hear, Back in Black or Satisfaction or Paranoia while there's high fantasy shenanigans going on? I think it would just add another layer of fun to the show and really enhance the overall tone of it. I've just remembered actually, there already was sort of that in the end of one of the Game of Thrones episodes. I think it was the one where Jaime's hand got chopped off. They had that Bear and the Maiden Fair song, that was a rock song that played in the end credits. So what I'm talking about, it would be like that, but it's all throughout the episode as well as the end credits. Maybe the end credits is the song that the episode is named after. I had another thought. Also, Band on the Run could also be the name of one of the episodes later on the show. That could also be a thing. So that felt like a shorter one, but short, snappy and fast, that's rock and roll, baby. Sorry, where are my sunglasses? Short, snappy and fast. That's rock and roll, baby. Unlike that bit I just did. That was neither short, nor snappy, nor fast. So that is my pitch for a pilot episode of Kings of the Wyld. We established 4 of the 5 main characters. We established the fact that they used to be this tight-knit fighting unit, and that now they've all gone their separate ways, and then we get to establish individually where they're all at in their lives now. Clay is living the mundane family life. Get a bit of backstory on Moog and his husband, and then on Matrick being this this rogue thief turned king. Obviously, Gabriel used to be this pretty boy, poster boy figure, and now he's very sad and mopey because obviously get to establish all these different character moments, get to establish Calarek as a threat, establish Last Leaf as the main threat, and we get to see a wyvern in the first episode. That's also a good point. And then we end with the complete sitcom-like funeral scene where Matrick tries to fake his own death, almost gets burned to death, then gets saved at the last minute, but then tumbles over the edge of a waterfall. And end credits. Just maybe like a lingering shot on Clay's face, just being like, oh, or something like that. Have rock music playing in the soundtrack, and name each episode after a rock song. That's how I would handle a Kings of the Wyld TV show, and specifically the bookends for the pilot episode. As I said, this was one of my favorite reads of the year. I absolutely loved it, and I would love to see it get turned into a show or adapted in some way. So that about does it for Kings of the Wyld's pitching a pilot. If you liked this video, please leave it a like. If you want to see more from me, please subscribe to the channel if you have not already. I definitely want to do more of these pitching a pilot style videos, and I'll also keep doing standard book reviews. Thank you all so much for watching this video, and as always, I will see you in my next one. The boys are backing down, the boys are backing down.